Welcome everyone to our third Employment Health and Wellness webinar series for people, third webinar in the Employment Health and Wellness webinar series for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. The webinar series is hosted by the HealthMatters program in partnership with Project Search and funded by the Ohio Developmental Disabilities Council, as well as Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, National Center for Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion under the Healthy Brain Initiative Award. Contents are solely the responsibility of the authors and do not represent the official views of the Administration for Community Living and the CDC. Today, the webinar, our third webinar, is titled Building Healthy Relationships at Work. Many times people with intellectual disabilities lose their jobs due to their interactions with coworkers, managers, or even customers. For example, touching coworkers, following others around, or sending too many emails can be problematic. Workplace relationships are unique in that they require certain ways of interacting, and interns need to, or people with intellectual disabilities need to learn how to navigate these relationships in order to be successful in the worksite and keep their jobs. In this workshop, we will review the Building Healthy Relationships at Work curriculum, explore a lesson plan to use with people with intellectual disabilities, and discuss barriers to discussing healthy relationships at work. I wanted to present Katherine McLaughlin, the speaker of today. Katherine McLaughlin is a AASECT Certified Sexuality Educator, is the founder, CEO, and lead trainer for Elevatus Training. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
You are.
Okay, thank you. As a national expert on sexuality and people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, she trains professionals and parents as well as individuals to become sexual self-advocates and peer sexuality educators. Welcome, Katherine. Just a couple of housekeeping parts. We are recording the webinar, and we will archive it and make it available on our HealthMatters YouTube channel. You will be emailed once that recording is available. And today we do not offer continuing education credits for today's webinar. And please put all your questions to the chat or question and answer box. I will monitor them. There is a 10 to 15 minute question and answer session after the presentation. So welcome, Katherine. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad you're all here today. And as Mina said, I am Katherine McLaughlin, and I've been a sexuality educator trainer for close to 30 years. And a lot of my work has been focused on people with intellectual developmental disabilities. And I worked a couple of years ago, I think, maybe it was only a year ago, 2 years ago with Project Search and creating a Building Healthy Relationships at Work curriculum. And as was mentioned in the introduction, that many people are losing their jobs because they weren't sure quite how to navigate these new relationships. And so we looked at the sexuality education curriculum and kind of pulled pieces out of it and made it more focused on work sites. And so it's part of the Project Search program. So anyone that's involved in Project Search has access to this curriculum and PowerPoint. But we also sell it through Elevatus as well if you're not connected to Project Search. But so I'm going to jump right in here to talk about this training and what we're going to do. We'll look at some barriers to teaching healthy relationships at work. I'm also going to go over a couple of lessons just to kind of give you a sense of what the focus is of those particular lessons. But I'll also talk about some of the other topics as well. And then lastly, we're going to look at how do we work with parents to get buy-in? What are some effective strategies for that? Which tends to be what people really want to talk about, like how do we eliminate any kind of barriers? So basically what I just mentioned, introduction, the curriculum, the topics, and then also lessons and parent buy-in. So if you could put in the chat your response to these the first two questions, because they're pretty much connected. So why do you think it's important to teach relationships and how to have healthy relationships in the workplace? Or what are you seeing happening in the workplace due to lack of education? So why is this important? So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the chat, and I'll just take a peek and see what you put in there. And then we'll talk about what makes it difficult for us to do this as well. So why do we need this? Why do interns or people with intellectual developmental disabilities need this sort of education? Oh, just looking to see if we got anything. Oh, here we go. Thank you. Some individuals are a little distant when it comes to building relationships. They don't have the relationship skills and aren't quite sure how to interact. What are some other reasons it's difficult?
They're coming to me privately, so I'll read them out. This is
Great. Thank you.
People with disabilities losing their jobs due to unintended inappropriate behavior. Hi, Lindsay. Because we don't always see healthy relationships at home or school. Transitioning from school relationships and work relationships can be difficult to separate. If we don't teach appropriate behaviors, relationships, so interns don't risk losing their jobs. Better environment at work, better teamwork, better quality of care. This is just a comment. Many of my interns have personal space challenges. They need to understand the boundaries of their peers. We need to teach appropriate workplace interaction with coworkers to avoid discussing inappropriate topics.
Yes.
Let's see. So our interns can understand boundaries. Professional workplace relationships are also required as part of VUMC's credo behaviors.
Okay. I've got a couple in this one as well. So for everyone, many individuals spend more waking hours at work than at home. Sometimes friendliness is confused with romantic interest. It's important to teach relationships in the workplace because I feel it forms a positive atmosphere and shows you have others to lean on when you need support. Yes. Okay, and then a couple of questions. Is this all sexual training? So when I get into the actual curriculum topics, it'll just show you more of what's covered. But it doesn't go far into sexual relationships. It goes more into how do you meet someone and who would be a potential partner. Okay, certain types of behavior is appropriate or not. All right, great. So let me go through some of these materials. So it's important for all those reasons you talked about, but many did not receive any kind of relationship sexuality education before they started their work program or their job. And as it was mentioned, you have these school relationships, but work relationships are different. And everybody's really nice. And I'm kind of interested in a partner. And so I've got a whole new group of people I can pursue. And so often haven't learned about the different types of relationships. And I'll show you that lesson today. Many people learn about relationships from television or even the internet. And sometimes parents are worried about talking about it. There's a sort of myth that if you talk about it, they'll do it kind of thing. And so they may not be talking about it. So really people with disabilities are learning from the internet and television about relationships. And also people have told me that they've been in the mainstream health class and they're removed during the sexuality unit. So the message is, this isn't for you. You don't need this, when they feel like they do need it. We already talked about losing their jobs, but also everyone deserves a full life, including a job, including a relationship, if that's what they want. And that all people are sexual beings. And what we tend to do is we say, no, this isn't the right place, but we don't find a way to substitute what the need is. So we say, not here, not appropriate, but then like, where is it appropriate? And how can I meet someone? So that's kind of as far as we go in sort of how do you meet other people and that you might be interested in, and who is it okay to be interested in? And so the more education, it's going to reduce this inappropriate sexual behaviors in the workplace. All right, so that's why it's important. And then just a quick, if you could do like, why is it difficult to talk about these things in your capacity, in the work site, in the workplace? What makes it difficult? So if we're saying it's important, it's needed, if you could put in the chat, why is it difficult for you to talk about this? So I don't know if they're coming just to you, Yasmina, but yeah, parents get mad. There could be sexual harassment charges, breaking unsaid social rules. There are times when someone saying just imagine or do act as if they're in a certain situation doesn't work because of different backgrounds and stuff. Yeah, pushback from families and higher ups. Right. Okay, this is increased independence. I don't have the tools to talk about it with the individuals I support. Yeah, so people often will see the need, but then feel like I don't have the tools, and that's why we created this curriculum to really help people with that. It's a tough conversation to have to begin with, let alone to have with folks with disabilities, and it's difficult to talk about this because people don't think it should be discussed. It's very taboo, absolutely. Yes. So what we did 2 years ago was we looked at the sexuality curriculum and we pulled out the lessons that seemed like they would make sense in the Project Search sites. So we created a curriculum with 12 lessons, and we had them reviewed by Project Search staff, and then we had them field tested in 5 different locations. And it was early 2020, so as you can imagine, we ended up having to do the field testing online rather than in person because it was the beginning of the pandemic. But got lots of feedback from the instructors, and then created the final version of the curriculum. We also use lots of pictures you can see on the cover from Project Search as well. So I know that some of you aren't Project Search, but those of you that are, it's available for you as part of being part of a Project Search program. There's lessons, handouts, slide decks. There's also a pre and post assessment with instructions. And there's also some additional handouts, like just the main points of every single lesson, and how do you work with parents, and how do you work with host business sites. And there's some handouts for that as well. And if you're not part of Project Search and you're interested in these materials, you can contact Elevatus. But here are the lessons, like I mentioned, 12 lessons. So really starting off with identity. So who am I? And that may already happen with the work you're doing, that people already know one another. But just in general, who am I? What am I like? What groups am I part of? So really this idea of when we are learning about relationships, part of it is knowing who we are too, and our identity. Then we move into gender expression. We talk about sort of like stereotypes and gender, and also talk about gender identity. And so that's also about identity as well. So the first 2 lessons are focused on identity. Then we move into, which is kind of the framework of the whole thing, what are the different types of relationships that there are? And how do you interact with people in those relationships? And what kind of topics are okay to discuss with people in those relationships? So that's why I'm going to show you the different types of relationships in public and private, because they connect well together. Then just general communication skills and decision-making skills. And then how do we have positive relationships at work? So being with coworkers, and how do we communicate, and how do we connect with them? And then we move into friendships. How do we become friends with someone as well? So that need for relationships is really very much an experience that everyone wants to have, is to be in relationships with different people, to feel that belonging and connection with others. So how do I make friends too? Then we move into, well, how do you move from a friend to a partner? What are the steps that you take? And as I mentioned earlier, who is it okay to be in a relationship with? And really for interns, it's often said, not a coworker, that's not, we're not here to meet people, we're here to work. But here are some places that you can meet people. And then what are healthy, unhealthy relationships and communication in those relationships, as well as healthy boundaries at work. And then the last activity is kind of pulling it all together. And how do you make decisions in the work site that are based on all that we've covered so far? So that's an overview, and it kind of just gives you a sense of how far we go with the topic. So when I work with people with developmental disabilities, I talk about the different types of relationships. And so I'll just say, what's the type of relationship that you're in with my mom or my brother or my boss or my teacher, and these different kinds of relationships. And then we categorize them into these different categories. So close family and friends. Here, I'm going to just pull up this handout here. So categorize them in these types of categories. So close family and friends, casual friends, casual family and groups, coworkers, helping professionals, people you don't know or strangers, and then romantic sexual relationships. So we figure out, like, how do you know what these different types of relationships are? So that's really where we start. And then the types of touch. But let me just go back to the slide deck for a second here. Oh, I like this going back and forth. This is great. So we'd start with close family and friends and really look at, well, how do we know that these three young girls are close family and friends? Like, how do we know this? What are they telling us with how close they are, how they look? So what feelings do we have with close family and friends, and how do we touch close family and friends? And the reason we know this is they're snuggling up and they look pretty happy, and they seem like they kind of look alike, so maybe they're related, don't really know, but they're obviously really close and comfortable together. Then we move to the next one, which is casual friends and groups. So this is an example of a team. So you're on a team, or your classmates or the interns at Project Search, you're all part of this group. And what are our feelings with casual friends and family? They tend to be, you feel pretty good, you know people. You don't know them as well as you know close family and friends. And then how do you touch people in these kinds of relationships? So we'll talk about that in a second. And then coworkers, this is a Project Search photograph. So what feelings do you have with your coworkers? You feel comfortable, maybe a little bit, maybe a little nervous because you don't know them that well. Maybe there's coworkers that aren't in your department, so it can be a kind of a mix of feelings. And then we'll talk about the touch part too. And then helping professionals. How do we feel when we're in a relationship with a helping professional? Sometimes we feel nervous because we've never met them before, but some of them we see all the time. Our teachers, skills trainer, the person at the grocery store. So people that are paid to help you and support you. And there's ways to touch as well. People you don't know. I tend to think that, or at least I hear from many people with developmental disabilities, stranger danger, stranger danger, and like very heightened anxiety about strangers. And, I think in some ways we've done a disservice because there are stories of people with developmental disabilities being lost in the woods, and a helping professional is calling them to rescue them, and they don't respond because they're strangers. Like, don't talk to strangers. So we want to put in that other category of helping professionals that you may not know, but they're there to help you. They usually have a uniform on. But then strangers, I really try to get the message across that most strangers aren't going to hurt you. Yes, some can. You are absolutely right, but most will not hurt you because there's a heightened fear around strangers. And then the last one is intimate, romantic, sexual relationships. So what kinds of feelings do you have in that kind of a relationship? And then I'll take you to this other handout. So then we talk about touch in these relationships. So close family and friends, we hug. And especially if we haven't seen them in a long time, we might not hug them every time we leave the room and come back. But if we haven't seen them in a long time, we hug them. But casual families, friends, and groups, we're going to do more of a fist bump, high five, or a handshake. And that's the same for coworkers and helping professionals. And a lot of the people at Project Search talk about how sometimes it's not so much the intern, but the people in the work site that haven't worked with people with disabilities and might see them in a light like they're sort of like children. And so they hug them every time the intern comes into the mailroom. And so sometimes it's teaching the host business site some of the main points and these different types of relationships and how you interact. Then we've got no touching. So strangers, we don't touch strangers. And then sexual romantic relationships, it's, a lot of the touch that we do in those relationships are in private and you always need consent, but you need consent from everyone to touch. So even a family member, you want to say, can I give you a hug? Or a coworker, let's do a fist bump and get consent too. So different types of relationships. And then I spend time having people talk about who they are, and this is more of that identity piece. And then I am, I'm part of, and then I have all my relationships over here on this bottom corner. And so I showed you that handout. So I'm just going to buzz through it here. And then what about customers, patients, guests, or clients, depending on the work environment? So where do they belong in the chart? And so where I usually put them is either casual friends or groups because you know them, or they're strangers because you've never met them before. And so they go in those two places. Again, you would only fist bump, high five, handshake, customers, patients, or clients or guests. So we wouldn't hug them. I use photographs too, so they look at the different photographs. So I had those on the slide. So you'll look at the different photographs and decide what kind of a relationship it is and why you think that. And some it's hard to tell, but you can talk about, well, what does this picture tell us? How, are they close? Are they getting close to one another? So you can analyze the pictures as a way to learn about the different relationships. And then I had people talk about the people in their lives. Who are their close friends? Who are their casual friends? Or parts of what groups are they part of? Who are coworkers in their life, helping professionals and strangers? And I think the hard thing with this group is sometimes they have close family and friends. Close family and helping professionals, but no friends, either close friends or casual friends. So that really the only people in their life are family and helping a direct support person or a skills trainer or an instructor. So they're paid to be with them. So how can we make it so that people have experiences where they have more people in their lives, such as coworkers and casual friends? All right, and so these are just handouts that people use to put in who are the people in their lives as well. And then there's also some videos that I have on my website that shows the different types of relationships. So using video is helpful too. So you can click on it and there's a close family, close friend, acquaintance, helping professional, and strangers. So you can look at these different relationships and identify them too. And then I also included in the slide deck that you'll get is this is the same things. And this is kind of an overview of comparing the different kinds of relationships. Then we move into what is public and private. And the reason we do this is really just saying, a general topic is, or our message is, the work site is public, no matter what. So even if you're in the bathroom at a work site, or the broom closet, or in a classroom, or in a restaurant, those are all public places. So there's certain things you can do in public, but not all. And so thinking of the work site as public helps with some of the behaviors and some of the boundaries too. So the other thing that I'll talk about as well is, if you have a close friend that works with you, when they're at work, you treat them like a coworker. Do you have a partner or sweetheart that works with you? You want to treat them like a coworker at work, or a family member. You want to treat them like a coworker at work. So really, when you're at work, everyone is a coworker or maybe a customer, and that everything is private. So it's kind of a narrow way of behaving and things we talk about. So I talked about the difference between these two and being very concrete. So public is when other people are there or might be there. It's a place where people can go in and out. And there's certain ways of speaking and touch that are okay to do in public, but not all. And then private is where you're alone and no one can come in and out. And there's certain ways of speaking and touch that are okay to do in private and not in public. So starting to think about that. And I always say private is at home in your bedroom with the door closed, or in the bathroom at home with the door closed. But we have to be careful. There was someone who was referring to their private school as rather than a public school. And they said, oh, we can do these things because it's a private school. So we have to be careful about what we teach private and what it means. I use photos again around, is this a public or a private place? How come? I might say things like, well, if you're way in the back and no one can see you, couldn't you be back there with your partner and just kissing? And, it's practically private. And and then it's like, no, people are there or might be there, and people can come in and out, so they can come in and off the bus. Private, this is you're at home in the bathroom with the door closed. And again, the movie theater, it's kind of dark in the back, but again, it's private because people can come in and out. All right. So I just talk about, I mentioned this, public places, and then a little more, get a little bit more into, what's okay to do in these public and private places. What are the topics that are considered public topics and private topics as well? So you'll see here in this other handout, there's different places, what we talk about in public, how we touch each other in public, and then private. So just those differences. And so if a workplace is public, then we can talk about, we can say hello to people, we can talk about weather and the work, we can talk about public events like movies or a performance or politics, a political event. So something that's a public event. And then we might shake hands, a brief hug with friends, not coworkers, family, sweethearts, might hold hands, high five. So we talk about the ways to touch and the type of topics. So somebody mentioned, for example, someone is sharing private things with their coworkers. So we want to teach how not to do that. And that there are certain people you can talk about those things with, but not everyone. I also talk about kissing, because that's one that, people are like, well, yeah, you can kiss, but not too long. And then we can talk about, if somebody is kissing for a long, really kissing in a public place, what do people think? What do people feel? And usually someone will say, get a room, which is, saying get some privacy. So again, another way to teach more about what behaviors are okay and not okay. So really talking about these different, what's okay in private, what's okay in public. So there's some questions that you can discuss, and I showed you that handout. And then the other thing is really, so here we go. We can talk about public and private things with close family and close friends. But if we talk about private things with them, we'll talk about private things in a private place. We'll talk about only public things with casual family, friends, and groups. Public things with coworkers. Helping professionals, we'll talk about public things unless it's a doctor or a nurse in a closed exam room, or maybe it's your instructor or your skills trainer and you're having a problem. So they would be a helping professional, but we wouldn't talk to we wouldn't talk to the person at the grocery store or the bus driver about private things. Only people that's what their job is to help you with problems or make sure you're healthy. And then people we don't know, some people say, no, I never talk to strangers, but other people will talk to strangers and they'll talk about the weather or something, but we wouldn't talk about private things with strangers. And then same with romantic sexual relationships. We talk about public and private, but those private topics have to be in private as well. And this is just a role play that you could use to just talk about Ashley and Isabella and why is Ashley feeling uncomfortable. And really, Isabella is asking all these very personal questions at work. And why is Ashley uncomfortable, but also what could Ashley do or say to speak up? Because sometimes people will cross our boundaries and we have to teach how to speak up around that as well. So there's some questions to debrief this scenario. And then also just being really clear about the difference between a coworker and a close friend, and the difference between being a friend and being friendly. And so coworkers are very friendly, but it doesn't mean that they're your friend. And so that's another discussion too. So you can kind of see the difference here. Close friends and family, we hug and we talk about public and private. Coworkers, we can high five, fist bump, high five, and handshake, and only talk about public things. All right, so I wanted to leave some time to talk about parents or guardians and getting buy-in. And I do a lot of this work around sexuality education with parents too. And I like to think about this behavior change model as a way to sort of figure out where people are and what might help move them to the next stage. So if you're working with parents who do not think of their child as a sexual person, doesn't need any kind of relationship education or anything, they would be considered in pre-contemplation. So they're not planning to do anything about this. And if you say you want to teach about healthy relationships, they might say, oh, no, don't open that can of worms. So people in this category tend to move because of some kind of an emotional experience. So the parent hears from another parent that their daughter got pregnant and they didn't even, the parent didn't even know their daughter was in a relationship. So then you kind of think, ooh, maybe I do need to talk about this. Well, so that's usually what moves someone from pre-contemplation. Sometimes talking about the risk of sexual abuse for this population can move parents into thinking, geez, maybe they do need some knowledge and skills around this topic. And that's true for worksite as well. If somebody's abusing you at work or bullying you, or so that's also a piece of sexual abuse prevention. Then people move into contemplation. Maybe they should receive some of this information, maybe not, I'm not sure. And this group, what really helps is a pros and cons. And when someone is ready to move to the next stage, they have lots and lots of pros and just a couple of cons. So we can really help parents by talking about some of the pros that we've seen around young people learning about appropriate boundaries and how to form relationships, but not with coworker, how to form coworker relationships, but a sexual romantic relationship. How do you do that outside of work? So pros and cons, once we have a lot of pros, then they're ready to start talking about this. So people in preparation are the easiest people to work with, right? So if you have a parent that's saying, yes, I want my child to learn about this, that makes it so much easier for us. But not everybody's in preparation and ready for this as well. So we have to accept people where they are, and we're sort of gently nudging them. But we can't change other people. We can only help them change themselves. So, and then action is someone's trying out a new behavior. So they just started talking to their child about these sorts of things. And then maintenance, they're more confident. They've been doing this for quite a while. So this is the stages of change theory, which was created by James Pachaska and Carlos Di Clemente. And they looked at people who had quit smoking. So I like to think about parents in these ways too, that, and accept them where they are, but figure out ways to maybe gently nudge them in the direction of action. All right, so just a few things about working with parents, and then I'll open it up for questions. But I tend, like, if you were to say, I want to start teaching building healthy relationships at work, and the parent says, oh, no, don't do that. I think it's good to start with, well, what worries you about that? To really kind of understand where they're coming from and what their worries are. They might say something like, well, I'm worried if you teach this at work, then they're going to be asking everybody out. And then I would say, actually, it's less likely that that's going to happen, because we teach all the different types of relationships, and that you actually can't ask coworkers out. You're there to work, but here are some ways to meet people outside of work. Build trust, and that takes time. And, I'm sure you all do a lot of that with parents and guardians already. But sometimes that's where I focus, rather than pushing the curriculum or something, trying to work to build a relationship with the family.
Catherine, there was a question.
Yeah.
Do we have to obtain parental approval to teach these lessons?
I think it depends on, I don't require it. Project Search might require it. I don't quite know how they manage that piece. These are adults, so I tend to say maybe notifying them would be nice so they know about it. But I don't think you have to, but I think people might do it just to be sure it's okay. But we also have to have pretty strong talking points around people are losing their jobs because they don't understand the different types of relationships. And I think once you say healthy relationships, you have way less of a reaction than sexuality. So if we're saying we're teaching about different types of relationships, how do you touch in those different relationships? What do you talk about? That's going to help them become a good employee. So I think parents tend to buy in, because they want their child to have a job. And so if we say this is going to help them keep their job, parents tend to think that's a good idea, but they might be a little nervous too. And people with disabilities have the right to learn about relationships, and we also want to work with parents. So I think many of programs like Project Search, it's a balance between making sure people have the right to things, but also making sure the parents, you're working with the parents, and that's always, it's kind of tricky. But also, if you know of any parents who are advocates for children or interns learning about this, they can talk to other parents. So I think that peer education model can be really helpful, rather than someone who works with their child. Another parent, it opens things up in a different way. I've had parents say to me, I really appreciate all that you do, but when someone has a child with a developmental disability and they're leading a workshop or they're talking to me, my wall comes down. Even if the disability is really different, it's just that common experience of having a child with a disability. I also at Elevatus have an online course for parents, but that's much more focused on sexuality than building healthy relationships at work. I talked about sexual abuse prevention. And the other thing is individuals, the self-advocates themselves, talking about why they want to learn about relationships in the workplace. So they go to their parents and talk about why they think it's important as well. And there's a newsletter too that actually I didn't include, but I can get you access to that. But that's more about sexuality education, and it's a newsletter for parents on how to talk to their own children about that. but I can absolutely pass that along. And then just a few myths about parents, that sometimes parents will say, well, you know, we should focus on the cognitive age of the child versus the biological age. And I'm saying that's actually not true. We want to focus on the biological age. So if you've got a 20-year-old, they need the same information that all 20-year-olds need. And if this is focused more on the work site, we want them to learn how to act like a 20-year-old at work. And so we don't want to say, because sometimes parents will say there's a cognitive age of 7, so we should just teach them what 7-year-olds need. And that's just not true. We want to base it on the biological age. There's also a myth that if we talk about relationships and sexuality, they'll do it. So as soon as we start, we're going to give them ideas and they're going to run out and start having sex. And that's just not true. And what they find in research around sexuality and relationships is when a parent talks to their own child about this, the child is more likely to wait to be sexually active. And if they do, more likely to use protection. That parent-child communication has a positive impact on the young person. Relationship education is teaching them to have sex, and that's not true. I showed you all the lessons. We don't even talk about sex. We talk about sexual behaviors a little bit around being in a sexual romantic relationship and public and private, but we don't go into, you know, birth control and all of that in this particular curriculum. We do offer some resources if people want to learn more. And then relationship education teaches someone else's values. And when I do education, I'm values neutral. I do not tell people what they should do or shouldn't do. I give information, so just facts. And the only values that I do include are much more what we call universal values or common values. So, you know, respect for all, kindness, you know, sort of polite sorts of things. Those are values I do teach. Obeying the law as a value that I teach too. So we do teach values, but they're more common values, meaning we all probably would agree with those, versus values that are more about when is it okay to have sex or with who or that kind of thing. You know, that's just not something that I tell people to do or not do. So that's working with parents. So I want to open it up for questions, but first, do you have any thoughts you could just put in the chat around what do you use to get buy-in from parents to talk about more controversial or sensitive topics? Does anyone else on this webinar have thoughts about how to work with parents and get buy-in as well? And along with that, you could put in the chat, we could do the buy-in, and in the question and answer, if you have any particular questions, I'm happy to answer them for you.
One of the comments came to me, Yasmina. A comment is from Mary, a newsletter or of upcoming activities and information being reviewed is a great way to let family understand what is being covered. We follow Katherine's recommendation and sharing. It's about helping them in the workplace. I send out a weekly email of upcoming activities and topics to discuss.
Great. Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, so it's keeping them in the loop, giving them some things to discuss at home, and reinforce that you could give them all the curriculum messages to families so they can reinforce that at home too. Yeah, so great.
And then another additional comment was, if a parent has a question, they will quickly call me and ask for clarification.
Great. So you've already worked on that relationship, and sounds like they trust you and will reach out to you if they're worried or anything. And then to start the conversation, I normally ask them to meet and talk about their ideas on the subject, then go into the main items I want to cover. Great. So you're partnering with parents, you know, rather than this is what we're going to cover, whether you like it or not, you know. So yeah, what do you think about this? And these are some things I've noticed in my role, and this is why I think it's important to teach these topics. And great.
One other thing that came through is assess how much parents know first.
Okay. Yeah. So how would you do that? Assess what they know about building healthy relationships. Would you just ask that, similar to finding out their ideas? So I'd be curious about that. And then there's a comment in the question and answer, building the relationship is huge. Absolutely. I have found that when I build a relationship with a parent, they're more likely to come to me and ask questions. And I think more likely to be okay with what I'm going to do as a teacher or an instructor, because they know me and they know me as a person first. Yeah. What if the individual I support is resistant to all forms of education because they feel like we are calling them inadequate in social skills? Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to sort of imagine that, but I guess I would start with, these are skills to being a good employee. I mean, you teach lots of skills around being a good employee, and part of that is this versus they're inadequate in some way. Like, part of being a good employee is understanding workplace boundaries and healthy relationships. One, so you don't bother someone else, but also so people don't bother you, and if they do, you can speak up. So it's about all of us learning about boundaries. So it might not be that they're inadequate with social skills, but how do they speak up if someone bothers them and starts asking all these personal questions at work, or ask them out all the time at work? So it's not just them learning it, it's also about speaking up if others don't have those boundaries too. So hopefully that helps. Other questions that you have? And just one thing, just to tell you a little more about Elevatus training, is we do lots of training, but also if you go to our website, and I'll put that in the chat too, we have an email distribution list, and you can get on that list and you'll find out about upcoming events. And also I send articles that I've written, or refer other resources and things. So there's that. But also on the Elevatus website, we have a resource page that has free resources. So there's lots of articles in there around, if you're a parent, how to talk to your kid. There's different activities, lesson plans, and handouts, and all kinds of things that might be helpful when you're teaching someone about healthy relationships in the workplace too. What else? What other questions?
Katherine, I have a couple of comments that came to me, and then there's a couple of questions. So I'll start with comments.
Okay.
One is from Brielle. Starting a newsletter has also been very helpful to maintain communication and contact with parents and guardians regarding the day-to-day activities of their loved ones. I have found that sharing the more exciting information and having this regular communication helps to make it easier to have the more difficult conversations with parents about relationships and boundaries.
Great. Yeah. So it's building that relationship, that connection, before you even get into some of the more difficult things. Great.
And I'm kind of in following up with that. One of the comments is students are on different levels of knowledge, and this type of education does need to be reinforced across environments, but who else is there to reinforce it?
Mm-hmm. Right. And so in the curriculum, we have a whole section, there's a manual as well, on what if these things happen in the workplace. So you're not part of Project Surge or another kind of employment support program, but you're, in the restaurant or whatever, and these things come up. How can you reinforce that? So really looking at different scenarios in the workplace. And so host business sites can respond or just knowing all of the main points. And we also give the public and private and the types of relationship handout to host business sites so they can reinforce that. So rather than hugging someone every time they come in, we can say, do you hug all your coworkers every day when you come to work? No. Okay, then don't hug this person too. So I think it's not only reinforcing the curriculum and the main messages, but it's also training others who aren't familiar with people with disabilities or how to interact with people with disabilities as well. So it's kind of all over the place. It's not just the person has inadequate social skills, right? I mean, we all have to kind of learn this, including the host business sites. And
Another question. In the past, a parent has reached out directly to me for information regarding workplace situations that their adult child did not want to discuss with them, but shared in therapy. What's my role to my intern and their wish for privacy? How much should I share with the parent when they ask?
Right. Well, I think that's probably more of a organization. I mean, I don't know if everything's confidential when you're teaching someone in general. I mean, I have the confidentiality policy unless somebody's being abused or abusing someone else, then I'm a mandated reporter. But most things I keep confidential in my classes. But I'm sure that there's, I mean, I guess the situation that was just brought up is a therapist told the parent, and then the parent told the instructor. So I guess I'm curious. I mean, maybe the therapist was concerned and so told the parent, and then the parent came to you for some help. So you could certainly, without saying what, teach those skills that might be helpful for that scenario, rather than saying, I heard this scenario, but if you have some information, why not teach some skills around it for everybody in the class, not just the one person? Other questions, Yasmina?
Yes, one came early on, and the comment was, I don't have the tools to talk about this topic with the individuals I support. So I guess my question would be where to start with your website, and where, like, step number one, we're all busy. So what would you kind of just like give me the core of it?
Yeah, so I would say step one is to take that types of relationship handout and start thinking about how you might teach that. I mean, the curriculum is for sale on our website too, if you want the tools, but you could also take some of these handouts, take some of the slide deck and create some lessons around it. There's a whole a scenario around someone asking private questions in the workplace. And so you could do some of that right away. Just start teaching that different kinds of relationships. I think the second piece is how do you help them form other kinds of relationships, like friendships or a sexual romantic relationship. That's kind of another piece of what's needed, because if we just say no, 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 and I said this earlier, it's going to keep coming back up. So we have to substitute that need to be in relationship, substitute that in another way that isn't about dating your coworker. Someone told me a story about two interns I'm not sure if it was interns or employees with disabilities, were kissing in the broom closet and ended up getting fired because they were at work. But it was the only place that they could be together was at work. And so how do you talk to families about, could they see each other outside of work so they can have some time together? Because that need to be together it's going to come up unless we figure out how to meet that need in another way. But the two that were caught, shall we say, in the broom closet said, well, people do this on Grey's Anatomy. right? So even going back to that idea about learning from television too. So if we're not talking about it, and I say this to parents all the time, if we don't talk about healthy boundaries or healthy relationships or sexuality, someone else is going to teach unhealthy, like Grey's Anatomy. All right, I have a question here. Can you speak to setting up the boundaries between support staff, job coaches, and our individuals when you start working at a site when we have brand new staff and this is their first job supporting individuals? Yeah, I think that's a great idea of, having new support staff learn about healthy boundaries with people they support. And I know many people hug people with disabilities. And we want to teach them to high five and fist bump and really give them the reason. You're not a mean person for doing this, but there are many stories of people with disabilities hugging all kinds of people, and all those people were really nice and fine until they hugged someone that wasn't, or was really offended, or was really scared, and then they go to jail for it. So even though it might feel like you're doing a really nice thing by hugging them, you're teaching them that they can hug people they don't know that well. And so using the handout as a way to teach, like you are a helping professional. And some people would say, yeah, but they're my friend, but they're not their friend. They're someone you support. Now, some people support people and they do become friends. And what that means is that the support staff leaves and they still stay connected to the person. But many support staff, if they leave, don't have any relationship with the person they're supporting after that. So yeah, some do become friends and they become part of their lives, but many that's not true. And so we have to teach support staff the importance of those boundaries. And you can fist bump and high five to connect, but you don't have to hug them every time you see them. And really teaching that relationship, like that there are boundaries that we need to learn in order to be a successful employee, and also to not be charged with a sex crime as well. And there are many people with developmental disabilities getting charged with things, sexting or crossing a boundary when they had no information about it first. It's one thing to be taught and then decide to do it, but being thought of as a sex offender and put on a sex offender registry because no one ever taught them what was okay and not okay. So I think that's a way to get support staff buy-in. You're welcome.
One other question. Can you speak in regards to students who are also tied into school system and governed under the school code of conduct in situations like these? Would you say they should be given additional leniencies with education or educators? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that there's the school culture and you have your rules and all those things, but then there's the work site culture too, and those might be similar, but they may be very different as well. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what you mean about like leniency. I mean, on the one hand, I don't want to assume that because someone crosses a boundary that they're actually a perpetrator. So I think I tend to be somewhat lenient and trying to figure out the meaning behind the behavior. Like, why is this happening versus just that behavior is sexual harassment. Like, tell me why you're doing that. And chances are the reason they're saying nice boobs or something like that is no one has taught those boundaries yet. And there's a whole lesson on all these different things you can say or do in the workplace. And when is it actually crossing the line and going too far? And really just spending time seeing. You can't walk down the hall in the hospital and say to someone, nice boobs. You'll get fired. And we just can't say those things about people's bodies. especially if we don't know them. I mean, maybe you say that to a partner in private, but not to a coworker. Not sure if that really answered it. But if you have follow-up questions, please ask.
Mary says yes.
Okay, good.
I have one last comment, and then I wanted to thank you. For those of you who have to leave us right at 2 p.m., the recording will be made available. You will be emailed once that recording is up on our YouTube channel. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to either one of us. And the last comment, there are elderly people that work as volunteers in the hospital and love to give the interns hugs. Interns are people with intellectual disabilities, for those of you who are not with Project Search. And I try to let our volunteers know that the intern needs to learn the boundaries. It can be difficult to get the message across to the interns and volunteers.
Absolutely. Yes, I bet. But I think, and I'm not sure what type of sort of onboarding for the volunteers. I know when I worked in a hospital, there was a lot, you had to go through a lot of orientation. And I just wonder if some of that might be in the orientation too. So it's not just after the fact, but like starting out. And you know, it's kind of a generational thing too. You know, they might feel more like a grandfather or a grandmother to this person, but they're not. They're a coworker. So maybe talking to orientation about including some of this and why.
Thank you so much. I think I hope everyone got their questions answered. I wanted to thank Katherine again. I will stick around for just another minute or so to see if there are any other questions. But thank you for attending and spending an hour with us. Have a great rest of the day, and thank you, Katherine, again.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Let's see if there's any questions or any quick follow-ups, and then I will sign us off. Everyone is saying thanks.
Great. Excellent.
All right. I don't think there are any questions.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Beth and I are going to be in touch with you. We have an idea, so we wanted to run it by you.
Sounds great.